Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into some of the most terrifying, absolutely mind-bending discoveries in physics. And I mean the stuff that literally keeps scientists awake at night. Now, we aren't talking about pretty pictures from telescopes today. We're getting into the exact experimental results, the hard data, and the mathematical proofs that suggest reality is way weirder and, honestly, way more confusing than anyone ever wanted it to be.
All right, let's kick things off with a totally massive, completely humbling fact. Everything you have ever seen in your entire life, every star, planet, galaxy, and yeah, even your own body, makes up only 5% of the universe. Just 5%. The other 95% completely invisible to us. About 27% is dark matter, and the only reason we even know it's there is because galaxies spin so wildly fast, they should literally tear themselves apart, but this invisible gravity holds them together. And then, an astonishing 68% is dark energy, which is just pushing space apart faster and faster. Get this, when physicists try to calculate how much dark energy there should be using quantum mechanics, the math is wrong by 120 orders of magnitude. That is a 1 with 120 zeros tacked onto the end of it. It's widely considered the single worst prediction in the history of physics, and it pretty much proves we are floating through a universe we barely even comprehend. So, moving into Act 1, our broken universe, when the macrocosm doesn't make sense. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that on a cosmic scale, our best rules for physics are just falling apart. Take something called the Hubble Tension, for example. We know the universe is expanding, right? But we actually have two incredibly precise ways to measure the speed of that expansion. If we measure the leftover radiation from the Big Bang, the early universe gives us one speed limit. But if we measure objects in the current universe, like supernovae, it tells us the universe is expanding 8% faster. It's literally like having two different radar guns giving entirely different speed limits for reality itself. One says 65 miles per hour, the other says 70. They obviously can't both be right, but the data stubbornly insist that they are. Okay, if that wasn't weird enough, think about this number for a second. 1,000,000,001. According to the standard model of physics, we really shouldn't even exist. Right after the Big Bang, matter and antimatter were created, and they should have been perfectly symmetric. And when they meet, they annihilate each other completely into pure energy. Basically, everything should have been destroyed right out of the gate. No stars, no planets, definitely no us. But inexplicably, for every billion antimatter particles, there was exactly one extra matter particle. Just one extra in a billion. That tiny, totally unexplained glitch tipped the scales. And that leftover matter is what built everything in the observable universe. We exist for reasons we still cannot explain. Which brings us to Act 2, the end of everything, how reality will be destroyed. Let's look at how this broken physics builds into the truly terrifying ways our universe might suddenly, or eventually, meet its demise. So based on all this dark energy and expansion, our universe faces a few potential apocalyptic scenarios. We could get a slow heat death, where stars just burn out, matter decays, and we fade into this eternal dark void. Or we could face the Big Rip, where expanding space accelerates so violently it eventually tears apart the Milky Way, then our solar system, then our planet, and finally atoms themselves. Or, if gravity actually overcomes expansion, we get the Big Crunch, where everything violently collapses back into an infinitely dense singularity. But honestly, the most immediate threat is something called vacuum decay. Basically, our universe's underlying energy field might just be resting in a false, unstable state. If it randomly drops down to its true lowest energy state, it would spawn a bubble of true vacuum that expands at the speed of light. Inside this bubble, the very laws of physics are instantly rewritten. Atoms wouldn't work. You wouldn't even have time to cancel your afternoon meetings. Your atoms would just cease to exist in their current form. And since the bubble moves at the literal speed of light, we would never ever see it coming. It could happen a billion years from now, or it could literally happen tomorrow. All right, let's zoom way in for Act 3, the illusion of reality, the bizarre quantum realm. If the macro universe and its apocalyptic ending sounds scary, wait until we look at the smallest scales, where the building blocks of space and time might just be elaborate illusions. Albert Einstein famously mocked quantum entanglement. He called it spooky action at a distance. He hated the idea because it seemed to violate his golden rule that absolutely nothing can travel faster than light. But modern experiments have proven Einstein wrong, and entanglement completely real. If you take two entangled particles, right, and put one on Earth and one way out on the moon, measuring one instantly affects its partner. Not at the speed of light, instantly. This implies that physical distance, the whole concept of space separating things, might not actually be a fundamental part of reality. deep down, everything might still be connected in a layer of physics where distance just doesn't exist.
And guys, it actually gets weirder. I know this sounds like the plot of a B-movie about time travel, but in delayed choice quantum eraser experiments, physicists set up tests where a particle acts as a wave or a solid particle, depending on if it's being measured. But here is the mind-bending twist. They made the choice to measure the particle after it had already traveled its path, and somehow the particle's behavior in the past changed to match the measurement choice that was made in the future. It is literally as if a choice you make later reaches back in time and alters what happened earlier. And all of this brilliantly illustrates what physicists call the block universe theory. See, every equation in physics works exactly the same forwards and backwards in time. There is nothing in the math that requires time to flow in one specific direction. Imagine space-time as a giant loaf of bread, where every single moment in time is just a different slice. The past, the present, and the future all exist simultaneously inside this solid block. You might not have experienced the future yet, but in physics, it's already there. That feeling of time flowing like a river might just be a trick your consciousness plays to process information one slice at a time. Okay, this brings us to the holographic principle, and this one is a real game changer. Back in the 90s, physicists studying black holes realized that the information capacity of a region of space depends on its 2D surface area, not its 3D volume. By 1997, it was mathematically proven that certain 5-dimensional universes with gravity are perfectly equivalent to 4-dimensional universes without gravity on their boundary. The math absolutely 100% checks out. What this means is that our 3D reality, including the depth you perceive and the gravity you feel right now, might just be a projection emerging from information stored on a flat, 2D boundary at the edge of the cosmos. Reality itself might be a literal hologram. Which leads us to our final section, Act 4, the ultimate mystery. Us, the observer within the simulation. Because the greatest unresolved mystery in physics isn't actually out there in space, it's right here. It's the mind observing it all. Here's a wild thought. Because of your biology, you never actually experience reality directly. Whenever an event occurs, it takes your brain about 100 to 200 milliseconds to process the raw visual data. But to keep you functioning in the world, your brain is constantly filling in the gaps, literally inventing the colors you see, and patching over the blind spots in your eyes. What you perceive as the present moment right now is actually a slightly delayed broadcast, completely edited and stitched together by your brain. You are basically living half a second in the past, completely dependent on a biological simulation. But wait, it's actually more disturbing than that. Consider the 10-second gap. In modern variations of the famous Libet experiments, researchers using brain scans can actually predict which button a subject is going to press up to 10 seconds before the person is consciously aware of making the decision. 10 full seconds. This strongly implies that your brain unconsciously makes a choice, executes it, and your conscious mind is kind of just along for the ride, constructing an after-the-fact story so you feel like you're the one calling the shots. So, since our brains are already simulating our personal reality, philosopher Nick Bostrom formalized an argument back in 2003 that scientists really can't easily dismiss. He argued that if any advanced civilization survives long enough to harness massive computing power, and if they choose to run detailed ancestor simulations of conscious beings, the number of simulated minds would vastly outnumber the real ones. Probabilistically speaking, it's overwhelmingly likely that we are not in base reality. We are almost certainly inside a simulation right now, and physicists haven't found a single definitive test to prove otherwise.
And that brings us to the absolute biggest wall in science right now, the hard problem of consciousness. Science is amazing at mapping the brain, right? We can map the chemistry, we can track the electrical signals, we measure the exact wavelengths of light hitting our eyes, but we have absolutely zero idea how a bunch of unconscious atoms vibrating in a wet biological machine suddenly combine to create a subjective feeling. A computer can easily label a 700 nanometer wavelength as red, but it doesn't experience red. We do. And physics has absolutely no equation for how physical matter creates an internal subjective experience. Now, despite all this existential dread, 95% missing matter, light speed vacuum decay, holographic projections, there is an incredibly empowering takeaway from all of this. We evolved from basic chemistry on a tiny molten rock to eventually build instruments that can actually grasp these terrifying cosmic rules. The simple fact that atoms organize themselves into a structure capable of contemplating its own bizarre existence makes our fleeting reality profoundly beautiful. We are, quite literally, the universe trying to understand itself. So I want to leave you with one final, totally provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in a hazy state of multiple possibilities until a measurement is made. And some physicists argue that a true measurement requires a conscious observer to collapse that wave function into a definite state. If that's true, then consciousness doesn't just emerge from matter. Matter depends on consciousness. Could it be that your mind isn't just a byproduct of the cosmos, but that consciousness itself is the fundamental building block that forces reality into existence?